In this lesson, we're going to look at the anatomy of the kidney and nephron. Now, we often think of the kidney as filtering the blood and removing wastes, and of course it does that, but it also is important for osmoregulation. Osmoregulation means control of ion concentrations in the blood and also control of water balance. And we'll see in the next few lessons how it does that. This lesson will focus on the anatomy. Here's a cross-section of a vertebrate kidney. So we've cut it in half, and in order to filter the blood, the kidney receives blood via the renal artery. So blood flows into the kidney in the renal artery, and then it passes through the anatomy that we're going to look at in a moment, and then once it's filtered, it comes out in the renal vein. And the urine that is produced as the blood is filtered and cleaned leaves via this tube called the ureter, and that goes to the bladder to be excreted from the body. Now there are two kidneys in the body, one on either side. So here we're looking at one side, there's another side matching as well. The ureters come down like this, and then there's the bladder. This would be the bladder, and then coming out from the bladder to the outside world, there is the urethra. So these are kidneys, this is the bladder, and then the urethra is how urine leaves the bladder to the outside world. Now, we can anatomically divide this portion of the kidney into two parts. This outer part here, right there, is called the cortex. Cortex means bark, and so that's the outer part of the kidney. And then this inner part in here, in these sort of pyramids, is called the medulla. Medulla means marrow, or the inner part. So there's the cortex and the medulla, and that's going to become important as we look at how the kidney functions. Now, in this part of the kidney, there are 1 million little units like this that we see on the right, and that is called a nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, and it's going to be doing all the filtration that we're going to look at. And it comprises two elements. There's the capillary elements, these capillary elements that are carrying blood. Again, the capillary elements carry blood. And then there are what we would call tubular elements, shown in yellow, and those are carrying filtered blood that is ultimately going to leave this way to be urine. So those contain filtrate. And in all of these diagrams, you're going to see the capillary elements drawn in red and blue, indicating blood, and the tubular elements carrying the filtrate in yellow. Now, if we look back over here, we can put this together and see that the capillary elements are being fed by the renal artery. So blood is coming in here via the renal artery, and then it's going around in these capillaries around the tubule, and then it's leaving this way, going to the renal vein. So that's how these two pictures go together. And this, which we're going to be referring to as the nephron, this yellow tubular structure, is in here in the cortex and the medulla. So it's sort of sitting, millions of them, or about 1 million of them, are sitting here like that. Okay, so that puts it in a little bit of context for you. Now, just to name these capillary elements right now while we're on this diagram, these straight bits down here are called the vasa recta. Recta, like rectangle, means straight. So these are the straight capillaries here. And this part up here, these are called the peritubular capillaries, peri meaning around. So we've got the peritubular capillaries, and we've got the vasa recta. Now let's look more at the tubule elements in the yellow. So if we now look at this more zoomed in diagram down here, we can see that this part in red is actually still blood. We've got blood coming in here from the renal artery and into this ball of capillaries and then out like this. So blood is flowing in here, sloshing around, and then coming out. This part coming in is called the afferent arteriole. Afferent arteriole, meaning the arteriole that is coming into this structure. And this part is called the efferent arteriole, the part going away. The arteriole, the small artery going away. And in here, this part is called the glomerulus. So the glomerulus is a ball of capillaries, and it's carrying blood. And it's fed by the afferent arteriole, and then the efferent arteriole leads away. This part here, which forms a cup surrounding the glomerulus, is called Bowman's capsule. Bowman's capsule. And together, Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus together are called the renal corpuscle. Again, the renal corpuscle, which means small kidney body, is Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus together. Now, why is this important? The blood flows in here, and then it is pressure filtered. So fluid filters out from the capillaries here into Bowman's capsule. In other words, we've got blood coming in and blood leaving, but a bunch of the fluid and the solutes that it's containing is getting pressure filtered into this cup of Bowman's capsule, and then it's going to travel down these tubes on its way to leaving the body as urine. And that's the basics of how the kidney filters the blood. It filters blood from the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule, where it's no longer called blood, it's called filtrate, and it doesn't contain cells or large proteins. And then that filtrate will travel out of the body as urine, although along the way stuff can be added to it that the body wants to get rid of, or reabsorbed back into the blood that the body wants to hang on to. Now let's name a few other parts of this structure. You can see that two parts of the tubule, here and here, are particularly twisty. Those are called convoluted tubules, convoluted meaning twisty, and the earlier part is called the proximal convoluted tubule because it is proximal or closer to Bowman's capsule. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule, and because that's a lot to say, and right, it often gets abbreviated as the PCT for proximal convoluted tubule, and this part over here is called the distal convoluted tubule, distal meaning farther away, and it's the distal convoluted tubule and gets abbreviated as DCT as well. This part here that goes down and then comes back up is called the loop of Henle. Henle is spelt like this. And we have a descending limb, the part that goes down, and an ascending limb. So this part is called the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, and this part is called the descending limb of the loop of Henle. And we need to name them because they have different functions. As we'll see, the descending limb absorbs water by osmosis, and the ascending limb reabsorbs solutes by active transport. Lastly, this part over here is called the collecting duct. And we will see in the next lesson that the collecting duct is a major site where the kidney actually decides how much water to reabsorb and how much to let pass out of the body as urine. Just a note that these little cutoff bits here, these are from other nephrons. So there are multiple nephrons that are not included in the diagram that look very much like this, that are all feeding in here into one single collecting duct. And then this then leads to the renal pelvis. So we saw above that the renal pelvis is that central part of the kidney that empties into the ureter, which in turn goes to the bladder and then out of the body. So this part here goes to the renal pelvis. So that's an introduction to the anatomy of the kidney and nephron, and in the next lesson we'll look in more detail at how these different structures work together.